I'd just like to welcome all of you to this event, Security and Insecurity in Micronesia, which is presented by the Pacific Center for Island Security, the Richard F. Titano Micronesia Area Research Center, and thank you so much to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Before we call folks up for opening remarks, I'd just like to acknowledge we have a room full of dignitaries. Okay, so our former Palau president, His Excellency Tommy Ramengasau Jr., former president from the Federated States of Micronesia, His Excellency Mori, the governor of Coast Rice State, the Representative, the Honorable Benzel Wilfred, the governor of Yap, from the FSN, the Honorable Francis Mutma, the Lieutenant Governor here in Guam, the Honorable Joshua Honori. We have the Chief of Staff of the Governor of Pohnpei, Mr. Patterson Shedd. National Security Advisor for the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Mr. Chris DeBroom. Director of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, the Bureau of Military Affairs, retired Lieutenant Colonel Edward Tomaxo. We have the Executive Director of the Community Defense Liaison Office here in Guam, Mr. Eric DePaul. Our Director of the Department of Public Safety and Chuk State Representative, Mr. Matt Myers. Assistant Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Mr. Wunde Delay. Deputy Chief of Police at Pohnpei State, Mr. Bronson Martin. Deputy Director from the Department of Health Services in Yap State, Mr. Dominic E. O'Leary. From the Office of the Attorney General of Chuk State, Ms. Esther Pidigraf. Special Assistant Office of the Governor of Coast Rice State, Mr. William. I'd also like to acknowledge we have the Consul General Representative, Consul General Ueda. Thank you for being here. There's our Consul General Representative, I believe, from the FSN and Palau as well. Thank you so much. All right. Well, to get this show on the road, you'll notice we do have some advisory council members of the Central France who are watching from afar. But nonetheless, I'd like to call up for some opening remarks. One of the it's all possible. Hideyuki Shiozawa, the Director of the Division of Ocean Nations at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation.
On behalf of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, I would like to thank you very much for joining us today for the Micronesia Regional Security Dialogue, bringing together participants from Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the home base of the Northern Mariana and Guam. The Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the SPF, is an NGO established in 1986 as part of the Nippon Foundation Group, focusing on international cooperation. This September marks our 40th anniversary. Our engagement with Pacific Island countries began in 1988. And since then, we have continued our efforts to contribute to their self-reliant development, as well as to regional stability and prosperity. We also have a history of developing the original framework for PAM, Pacific Island Leaders Meeting, a policy dialogue among heads of state hosted by the government of Japan. Currently, the Division of Island Nations is implementing projects aimed at strengthening maritime law enforcement capabilities in Palau the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Promoting community-based ecotourism by applying the Saskar model, centered in Palau and expanding to other Pacific Island countries. Preserving traditional cultures and advancing various policy recommendations. I travel to Pacific Island countries dozens of times each year. Recently, in connection with the preservation of traditional culture, I visited Rapa Nui, Easter Island in March, Samoa, Palau, and Taiwan in April, and the Republic of Marshall Islands last month. These visits have given me the opportunity both to experience the level of Australian culture and to deepen my understanding of modern contemporary history. For example, the border between Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, as well as the division between American Samoa and the independent state of Samoa, linked to the Sudan Samoan Civil War. Likewise, the current distinction between the northern and southern hemisphere in the Pacific Islands region, spread by the equator, has its roots in World War I and World War II. Stand today upon the foundation of this history. From Japan's perspective, regional security encompasses 14 independent Pacific Island countries. In 2021, the government of Japan launched the JP, Japan Pacific Island Defense Dialogue, and the third meeting was held in Japan this April. At the same time, we that in considering Japan's security interests, Northern Micronesia, namely Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Young State, Tube State, Member State, and Soy State, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the United States and Congress of the Northern Mariana Islands at one is of particular importance. From this standpoint, today's gathering as a sub-regional framework is highly needed. Moreover, the concept of security is not limited to defense and military matters. For Pacific Island countries, non-traditional security issues such as climate change, disasters, energy, the economy, health, consumer security are equally important. Both the government of Japan and the NGOs like ourselves are working through various approaches to support the self-reliance of Pacific Island countries. Historically as well, the importance of Northern Micronesia has been widely recognized. As in the past, we will continue to work together with Pacific Island countries for regional stability and prosperity in our base of geopolitical dynamics. Last September, Prime Minister Rambuka of Fiji, during his visit to the Saskatchewan Foundation, referred to the episode in which Magellan named the ocean Pacifico, East Sea or Pacific Ocean in 1521, and introduced the concept of the ocean of peace. While in and building sufficient preparedness, we hope to work together to ensure that geopolitical competition does not escalate and to promote peace and prosperity in the region.
Morning to all distinguished leaders, colleagues, and friends from across the country. It's an honor to welcome you to when we gather as Micronesians, we are not together as strangers. Rather, we are gathering as communities connected by the ocean of modern policy, political systems, and strategic processes. Our ancestors navigated vast distances, not only with skill, but with trust, with relationships built across time, and with the understanding that survival evolutionary is always histories are communities shared food during hardship, welcomed travelers from distant islands, and maintained ties that stretched across the Pacific. The ocean between us was never a barrier. It was a pathway that connected us. This spirit of interdependence remains one of our greatest strengths today. We understand that no island stands alone, and that security is not just about defense or geopolitics. Security is also about protecting our people, preserving our cultures, strengthening our relationships, safeguarding our environments, and ensuring that future generations can thrive in our lives. Challenges facing our nations, our region, such as economic uncertainty, migration, maritime independent water security, and increasing not they require the same values that sustain our ancestors, festivals, collective responsibility, respect. This dialogue is important as it creates space for migration citizens, migration and migration solutions. It reminds us that regional security must be founded not only in strategy, but in relationships and shared responsibility. It's fitting that this dialogue is hosted by the Pacific Center for Private Security, Susquehanna Peace Foundation, and the Richard in a shared effort to strengthen understanding and cooperation across the Pacific Center for Island Security helps ground our conversations in regional security realities, supporting informed dialogue and cooperation that reduce conflict and strengthen stability across the Pacific. The Susquehanna Peace Foundation reminds us that the purpose of this dialogue should contribute to peace, to strengthen stability and resilience across the Pacific, and that between conflict and research. Hard, built on the idea that growth and development of each child is tied to the stability and prosperity of the region as a whole, affirms that this conversation is
probably longer continuum, grounded in the region's history, contributing to the historical record of the region, and it marks the beginning of an ongoing conversation that must be carried forward for future generations. This gathering creates space for conversations that are so important for our region right now. Conversations that are thoughtful, honest, and grounded in who we are as Micronesian people. As we begin our discussions, may we do so with humility, openness, and a commitment to strengthen the ties between us. May we continue building a future where Micronesia remains connected not only by geography, but by a shared purpose, mutual respect, and care for one another. Suduos Maasi, thank you. And I hope these next 2 days lead to meaningful dialogue and fruitful collaboration. It is in this spirit that I warmly welcome you today.
Suduos Maasi, Dean,
And last up for some opening remarks, we have the chair of the Pacific Center for Island Security, a former congressman from Guam, president emeritus of the University of Guam. The list can go on and on and on. I'd like to welcome Dr. Robert Underwood.
Buenas and half a day. All right. Well, good morning to all of you. I will, normally we try to say all the greetings that we remember. I didn't write them down, but so I'll try to remember them from memory. Certainly, Kaslelia, Lemwo, Mugatin, Ali, Yokwe, and of course, Hafade. So what did I miss? Just trying to see if you're paying attention. Okay. You know, the idea of doing a think tank, the idea of creating a think tank is a kind of an interesting challenge. You know, there's an old song that goes like this: where do the smart fish swim? They swim in a think tank. So all of you today are smart fish. Okay. Now, how do you get the smart fish? How do you get them? What is the fisherman? What does he use to get the smart fish? He uses, or she, scholarship. All right. Now, in order to bring this together, Carnegie made PCIS possible through the efforts of some interested individuals. And Sasakawa provided the scholarship that brought you here. So this is a very interesting gathering of individuals. You know, and a think tank is supposed to be bold and visionary. But then the other words come in. You have to be practical and realistic. And then other words come in, like, what is the strategy? And how does that different from taking the next step? Because you have to move forward, whether you have a big strategy or not. So some of you are going to, throughout the day as we discuss strategic vision, are going to be using your iPhone to take the next step. Because you all have heavy responsibilities. Sure. And you're all trying to do many things at the same time. But the term security is what is under analysis. Okay? What is security? More importantly, what is insecurity? So some of us are unsure. Some of us are uncertain. In fact, all of us feel that way at various points in our lives and various points in our career. And that's where we find ourselves today. The great geostrategic competition has come to our shores. It's been on our shores for decades before and centuries before. But this time it's coming at a greater intensity since the end of World War II. The end of World War II brought a different strategic configuration. It brought together the territories, the trust territory. It brought together the government of Guam, and over time, the idea of the trust territory and the creation of the freely associated states and the creation and the development of the Commonwealth made sure that this was not just a big, wide swath of ocean. It was sort of an American lake. It was meant to be impervious and a kind of a barrier to penetration by other nations. And admittedly, I think most people were comfortable with that. Most people felt comforted by that. But there were lots of challenges associated with that. And so now we reach the point where you have independent nations with various levels of sovereignty, if we're being honest with ourselves. The COFA states have various levels of sovereignty. We have the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, and we have the unincorporated territory of Guam. What an elegant title that is. So those two territories are really parts of the United States. So how do you bring together a joint conversation about the challenges that the region faces as a region? That's incredibly challenging. So we try to be bold and visionary. And then when we are bold and visionary, someone comes along and says, oh, you can't really do that. That's not your role. Your role is something else. When we come together, we repeat all things that we've heard already, especially for the last probably 30 years. The notion of a blue continent, the notion that the ocean doesn't divide us, it unites us. Easy to say, but really, really hard to implement, because there are divisions, there are attitudes, there are different conditions that obtain everywhere. So for those of you that are in the so-called new category, there's new categories for region. Sometimes this is referred to by federal agencies as the U.S. affiliated island Pacific. Now, I don't know whether some are comforted by that. Because, how do you measure your membership in the United Nations and your autonomy as a country versus the fact that you are part of a different kind of network? And that network is sort of unspecified. So our task here is to basically understand that there is no policy that is so perfect that it cannot be analyzed. And that there's no power that's so invisible and strong at the same time, that is so dynamic. There's no power that will not benefit from questioning it. And that's what we're faced with. We're faced with the reality that we are part of a larger strategic vision. We're at the tail end of climate change, at the beginning and the tail end of climate change. We're at the tail and the beginning of strategic competition. All of you are in somebody's strategic plans, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. All of us are in somebody's strategic plan. So our role, what does that mean? Well, it means that we create a think tank, which we call the Pacific Center for Island Security. And we're encouraging that kind of open dialogue and open conversation. But there are polls for everything. There are polls to decide which politician is in the lead. There are polls to decide which profession is the most admired. The profession that is almost always at the bottom is not attorneys, not lawyers, like many of us think, lawyers must be down at the bottom. Ranking lower than lawyers are think tank representatives. Because if you really understand the world of think tanks and you watch the news, every time somebody comes on as an expert, it's because they're part of a think tank, a self-described expert. So I went from being a member of Congress to being president of the university, had a couple of detours along the way, and now I find myself at the head of a think tank, and I'm probably at the lowest professional level I've ever been. But it's okay. It's okay, because it takes the challenge of understanding who you are and who you are in relationship to others that helps us get closer. Because we all have an innate human desire to search for the truth and to measure that truth against our deeply held values, so that our deeply held values and the truth allows us to develop better, stronger policies in our own interests and in the interests of all. So that's what we're dedicated to, and hopefully we'll see some of that today. And I want you to be very open. We're fortunate to have so many individuals here. I just want to mention that on our advisory council, our former president of the FSM, Manny Mori, is here, and former president of the Republic of Palau, Tommy Remengesau, is here. The other members that could not be with us, Governor Juan Babauta of the Northern Marianas, he's still trying to get power from Sinlaku. So obviously he wasn't going to be here. And Anote Tong, from former president of the Kiribati, and Professor Tara from the University of Hawaii couldn't be here. But this is who we are. And so I'm grateful for the partnership with Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And I'm grateful that you are all here today. Thank you very much.
Sizu Smasi. I just want to also welcome the Executive Director of the Commission of Decolonization, Mr. Melvin Wampat Boras here. We have Dr. Laura Sauter and Dr. Samuel Betances in the back over there. Dr. Carlisle Corbin is here in the WAC over there. And then we also have my colleague, Larry over here, Larry Rangatal, right over here. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to move straight forward to Leland Bettis, who is another founding member of the Pacific Center for Island Security. One of PCIS's flagship products is called the Micronesia Security Monitor. And so Leland will be walking us through this to see how this can be a useful tool for you in your analysis, in your governments, and your professions. But before we do that, just other things, we do have coffee right outside with water. The restrooms, if you go right out there and to the left, all the way down, they're on this floor. You do not need to go downstairs to find the restroom. So refreshments there and restroom right there. All right, everybody. I hope we're having a great time so far. Thank you all again for being here for dialogue on Micronesian security. Sizu Smasi.
Thank you, everyone. The Micronesia Security Monitor. Why Micronesia Security Monitor? Well, it really is about the story of PCIS in some ways. So Dr. Underwood talked about what the think tank is about. What PCIS specifically about was really to focus on the Micronesia region, to bring clarity and focus to the Micronesia region. Look, no one else is doing it. And if we don't do it, no one else is. So that was sort of the genesis of the foundation of the PCIS. I think one of the other things we want to do as we developed a platform to look at the region, we wanted to break down the stovepipes that exist. Right now, there's activities going on all across the region, but they're tended to be seen as individual pieces, not as part of a whole. And so what the Micronesia Security Monitor wanted to do was to be able to project what's happening in the complexities of the region. Because look, what's happening in Palau, what's happening in Yap, what's happening in Tinian, what's happening in Guam are all related. And I think I'll lay some of this out as we go through the Micronesia Security Monitor. Mm-hmm. So the monitor was visualized, at least in our internal planning, as a place to take all these complexities, to lay them out sort of in a flat way, without value judgments, but simply to present data and to present current information. So what the Micronesia Security Monitor does very broadly is it looks at the entire region and lays it out in a mapping layer that's then tied to very current information. And you'll see as I go through this today how that works. As we look through the region, and I'll take you to the map, which is our sort of the cornerstone of the piece, at least visually. This is our region. If you look at the map and look across the top here, we have just some general basic things. We have country profiles, and I won't go through this, but all the countries of the region are identified. Basic information is here. We look at military bases and places, and as we see what we call the second island chain that runs down here, this is sort of our area, the Marshall Islands, is linked on the backside through a bunch of communications networks. And we'll talk, over the next day or so about the first island chain a lot. This is the first island chain where most of the national security strategies of the United States, Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan are all located. The second island chain is where we are. That's, where we're getting all this activity that we're all seeing in each of our islands. So we wanted to present sort of a flat basis to look at bases and places and ongoing developments. We also wanted to look at sort of the dark side of this, which is range capabilities. And I'll go through this a little bit later, but we look at what are the weapons systems that are being employed by the US, by China, by North Korea, and where do they reach? Where do the missiles reach? Where do the planes go? And it's very granular and very detailed, and I don't know we'll go into the depths of it, but it's something that can be explored. We look at military exercises on an ongoing basis, and we also look at maritime activities. And maritime activities, we have a scope of vessels of interest that we track, research vessels, all types of offshore platforms. We look at anything that has an automatic information system that's turned on. We're going to track it in this vessel of interest categories. We don't look, however, at fishing vessels. That would simply overwhelm our system in terms of our ability to track and make sense of what's going on. Not that there's not value in what's happening with fishing vessels, but that's sort of beyond the scope of our abilities to manage on a regular basis. So I will go through some of these to sort of demonstrate what we're looking at. And then as we finish up and have questions or feedback, we certainly want more feedback. We have ideas about further development. We welcome any input from any of you on what we could do better, what things we should be thinking about. And I'll share with you, offline what we have on our roadmap in terms of ongoing development. But first, let's look at bases and places. So if we look at along the Marianas Island chain, and by the way, Marianas Palau Island arc, we see all these places, and in each of these places we look at ongoing activities. Let's look at a place. Let's look at Palau, just as an example. So if we go to, for some reason, I'm not seeing Palau. Here we go. We go to Palau, we have a host of ongoing activities. Oops. Give me a second. My computer has gone off here. So if we look in Palau, there's a whole host of activities. You can see there's activities at the port, and if you want to drill down on that, you could. You could look at what's going on in Peleliu. And then if you want to get sort of up-to-date information about what's going on in Palau, you see that any and all activity that we are able to find in public sources is going to be here. So all kinds of activities are going to be noted here. We do not take a view on what to input here. We simply put any intelligent open source public information here. So any analyst that's looking at this will have access to all the information. So we do this for bases and places across the spectrum, every place along the region. So if you're looking at any, the Northern Marianas, I'm not going to go into the Guam bases, but, in Guam, we have very detailed information on the missile defense system, on all the various programs that are underway. If you look at YAP, we look at ongoing developments. There's the port in YAP. Then, you can drill down on this and look at the details. I'm not going to do that here, but it'll give you an idea. Again, looking at all the different information that's related to ongoing activities in YAP. It's going to be demonstrated here. So we're trying to bridge spaces by tying this information in. I'm going to look at, let's look at military exercises. I think, this is an important piece to think about, and you'll see, I'll sort of make a connection as we go through some of these with some of the maritime activities. But in general, if you look at this area here, there's the Marianas Island Testing and Training area, and then there's the Marianas Islands Range Complex. Both of these are significant ongoing exercise areas for the U.S. government. It's convenient because of the access that the U.S. military has to facilities in the region, but it's also significant in terms of where it looks like U.S. strategists, at least military strategists, are thinking about conflict. And we're not going to go a great deal today. We're not going to talk about tactics, but it's very clear based on the developments that are occurring along the Marianas-Palau Arc, as well as ongoing activity by both the Chinese and the U.S. militaries, that this particular area in here looks to be a significant area of conflict if there is any sort of kinetic engagement between the U.S. and China. I think there's an expectation at some levels, although it's not certain, but certainly there's preparations for conflict in the Philippine Sea area. And so the fact that we have so many ongoing exercises in this area, and when we get to maritime activities, I'll show you some examples of where it looks like, Chinese research vessels are doing a lot of work. It's very clear this is a very excitable and dynamic area in the region. So, but not to belabor that point, but to look at exercises. So when we look at exercises, we try to, again, provide as much detailed information. Again, this is all public sources, so we're not disclosing anything that's classified. Looking at an exercise, we look at all the countries that are involved in an anti-submarine warfare exercise that went on earlier this year, actually 2 months ago. It occurred all in this area. You had the Australians, the Indians, the Japanese, and the New Zealanders together with the United States working out of Anderson Air Force Base and working in the Marianas training and testing area. We'll provide a breakdown of all the different participating organizations that were involved in these exercises to the extent that we can by name. And then we'll identify all of the equipment that was involved. So if you're an analyst looking at how serious are people preparing for conflict, are doing exercises around potential conflict, then this will be a place where you can identify all of those assets and the organizations. And again, as with all of these, we'll have any related news related to these exercises will be included here. Let's talk about range capabilities. First, let's talk about the United States. We're looking at Anderson Air Force Base and, a B-52, which is a classic. You can see that basically that B-52 is going to be able, you can't see it because it can go around the world. But to give you an idea of, some of the other aircraft that might come in here, like fighter aircraft, you can see that they're limited in terms of their reach in the region. So it'll give you an idea of their range capabilities. But if you're looking at, a fighter with limited range capabilities, and pardon me for going down a rabbit hole a little bit here, but then you look at a tanker, which might provide support, that will tell you how far a tanker can go to provide sort of fuel support for fighter aircraft. Again, we're trying to make a fairly flat representation of capabilities. Let's take the other side of the coin and look at China. And let's look at one of their rocket bases, and let's look at one of their sort of infamous missiles, the DF-26, also called the Guam Killer. And there you see, the reach of that Chinese missile asset across the region. Again, this is not particularly comforting, but again, it's important information for us to understand in relation to the ongoing geopolitical environment. And let's go to the really fun piece. So we're really lucky to have ongoing work on this. We update our maritime activities on a regular basis. And again, those of you who go to the Micronesia Security Monitor, and you'll be able to play around with this, and believe me, you can go down rabbit holes here. What I got here is just, again, let's look at the vessels we're tracking. We're tracking offshore support vessels, which we've tagged as one of our vessels of interest because we look at them as supporting a range of military activities, but also supporting activities around ocean research and potentially ocean mining. All manner of research vessels. So this could be anything, the Japanese have a lot of fisheries research vessels, so they'll be here. But, there's also going to be a range of other oceanographic research vessels, which could be doing anything from, scientific research to any other oceanographic issues related to, for example, submarine warfare. We track tugs, we track Coast Guard. We also have military operations here, but, the military of all countries typically do not use their AIS systems. But when we have identification of military vessels in certain places, we will tag them. Any government vessels we track. Dredgers we also look at because we see that as being associated potentially with some sort of ocean mining activity. So those are the vessels we track. So in the last 30 days, and this is up until, the latter part of April, some of these may be early May, these are activities that are going on in the region. Let's just go to this particular Japanese research vessel. And this is the tracks for this vessel over a long period of time. But just go, Emmy, sorry. It's not the one I was looking for. Let's take a Chinese research vessel. So this gives you but once I've clicked on the vessel, you get a view of its tracks across the region over a longer period of time. Most recently, it's been back in China, but it's been all over the region. And I want to particularly show you this sort of stuff. So if you think about the training and testing area of the United States, and then you look at the Chinese research vessel, and we drill in on this, it gives you an idea of how the Chinese may be thinking about Philippine Sea. Again, I'm not going to make any specific judgments about what they were actually doing. Here's Guam. Oops, sorry. Here's Guam, and over the course of this vessel's visit to our region, it's been doing a lot of oceanographic research right off an area that hosts 5 U.S. nuclear attack submarines. So you can try to figure this out for yourself. By the way, we'll have information on these vessels. So if you're interested in drilling down on this vessel, all of their maritime identification information is also here. So it provides a basic basis to look at some research. I'm going to back out a little bit. I want to go down and look at this down here. And I will come back to this in this afternoon session. This is a very interesting track. This vessel came out of Kiribati. But if you look at where it's located on the north-south route between Australia and Japan, the particular research is going on here by this vessel. Seems to fill an important gap in terms of sea lanes. So again, you have quite a bit of deep oceanographic research that's going on by this vessel, which also is a mothership for submersibles. So there's some really serious deep ocean research that's been going on here on what is a north-south route between Australia and Japan. And as we'll talk about later today, in the event of wartime, this is seen as a major route between Japan, actually to Japan from anywhere that's east of Africa. The routes will go up through here to Japan. Normally, they go through, Straits of Malacca, Australian ore, et cetera, goes through these areas currently. But wartime, this is the route. And there's a lot of Chinese research going on here. And again, I just point that out. Again, these are references. How you use this information is up to you. I'm just pointing to some interesting anecdotes. I'm going to put in the number of a vessel that I know. This is a U.S. research vessel. It's a really interesting vessel. It's an unmanned vessel that can stay out at sea for up to 60 days, 6 months. It's been tested in the Marianas and Guam for the last 2 years. It's called Sail Drone. It's a company out of San Diego, which is doing autonomous vessels. It's currently under contract from NOAA, but I raise this because those of you who have been following some of the issues around deep sea mining in the Marianas will see that and are aware that recently the Bureau of Ocean Energy Mining added significantly to their area in the northern Marianas that they wanted to do seabed mining in. The addition of the area, the original area was to the to the east of the Marianas. The added area, which came in just this year, is in this area to the west of the Marianas. Sail Drone 3200 was mapping that area heavily, very, very heavily, as you can see here, in terms of their tracks, late last year. What's interesting about Sail Drone, the Sail Drone series of vessels that are doing oceanographic research, is that they're doing oceanographic surveying that is fed immediately up from the vessel to the satellites and into data sets. So there's no like collecting the data from the vessel once it gets back to shore and scientists pore over it for months. This information is going immediately up into some sort of cloud network that's being analyzed. So that's what happened in the Northern Marianas. What's happened here more recently is interesting. This activity was occurring right up against the FSM's EEZ, and this was occurring in, I think, March and April of this year. By the way, this little track right here represents Sail Drone 3002 escaping Senlaku. That's the route it took when it got away from Senlaku, hanging around in Chuuk for 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks. But what this also is indicative of is the ongoing active interest of this. Again, this vessel is currently contracted by NOAA. The active interest in mining the seafloor, in surveying the seafloor along areas right up next to the Federated States of Micronesia's EEZ. With that overview, I will open it up for any questions unless anyone has it. Yes. Can you use the mic?
I'll talk loud. Does the information for military bases and places, is it exclusive to Micronesia, or does it include US bases in the Philippines and Japan?
No, we're really focused on our part of the world. There's lots. Look,
and just to point out, right, that in a bigger context, there's obviously a relation and a network elsewhere that is related to the ones that are all the assets being constructed throughout our region.
Yes. So, one of the things that's a part of the geostrategic, geopolitical analysis set right now is that there is a ton of resources by countries, and there's a ton of research by independent think tanks and others on what's happening in the First Island chain. The South China Sea, there's a whole ecosystem of research on the South China Sea. There's really none on our part of the world. East of the Philippines, going to Micronesia and the Marianas, there's nothing. So that's the void we're trying to fill. We're working, looking at the buildup of activities on bases in the Philippines or the South China Sea. We are in contact with people on projects, but the people that's in what we're doing because we're filling a gap in the knowledge about what's happening in the region as a whole.
Take a look at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, we could. And look, the Guam Guard has relationships with the Philippines. So the Guam Guard relationship with Palau, for example, is going to be noted here. Any future Guard relationships that may be emerging between areas in Micronesia, we'll track that and note that. But we're really going to be focused on Micronesia because that's the gap that needs to be filled. That's where there's been an information void. It's an underanalyzed area. And this is really in some ways, this is like the alpha of the project, because we're just laying out the data. Like we have not done a lot of analysis. I've given you some ideas about what's going on, but we have not done a deep dive in analyzing all the data sets that are here. So that's really, in many ways, for PCS, the next step for us is to spend more time going through the data we're collecting and create better analysis.
This is open time for questions. Also, if you are in the Zoom room, you can put it in the Q&A chat, but for us here, there are microphones right in front of you. So if you have a question, this is just a time for free and flowing conversation and questions about this. Like Leland said, this is our first sort of alpha product. So any feedback is useful, questions about this, criticism, all is welcome, and directed towards Leland. Thank you.
So again, just show you some of the granularity. If you look at, the enhanced integrated air and missile defense system proposal for Guam, we're going to have a lot of data here. We have photos of where all the proposed sites are. Again, I'm just biding time while people think about their questions. Any questions? Yes, Vera.
Okay. Yes, so thank you for the overview. It's very impressive. We've been looking at it since you released it. But I have a question. Have you considered like space monitoring with this? And do you think it's as important as sort of, I mean, it looks like, we're looking at maritime, we're looking at land-based, but does the monitor, or do you intend to look at monitoring, space and the communicate in that realm?
Yeah.
Because
So
when you look at like who's watching us from space, right? That seems to be a really big topic, So I was just wondering, have you thought about that?
absolutely. How much have we done on it? Very little. Look, space is the place for so much stuff that's about to happen. And for those of you who are not familiar, Guam lies along a very peculiar azimuth, which makes it unique. Guam, in fact, until NASA started putting stuff here, they had that was basically a black hole in terms of global observation. So the ground stations in Guam provide a very unique position from which to gather data and transmit data. And with more things going on in space, with low Earth orbit satellites, all the way to the geosynchronistic satellites, which typically monitor this area, there is so much going on. But and again, I'm just looking at this year's Department of War budget. The Space Force is getting like a 50% boost in its budget. So there's clearly a lot of stuff going on. The Chinese, by the way, are putting satellites into orbit at almost the same rate as the United States these days. They're still far behind, but their stuff they're doing is incredibly good. And I think, were they providing stuff to the Iranians to help the Iranians target stuff? We don't know for sure, but if they had some of that capabilities, it's going to be pretty darn good. Having said all that, we're not space experts. It might be something we look at going forward, but I also want to mention something else, and that is that everything that is in space, that's either coming down from space or going from the ground up to space, has to come through Earth stations. And so there's always a grounded place for them. And where there's a grounded place for them, again, most of the world's communications, including military communications, are not done at the space level. They're done through fiber optics. And Guam is the big switch, as it's called in the Pacific. The big place that links back to the Marshall Islands, which is the other significant communications node in the U.S. network in the Pacific. But from Guam, all the U.S. fleets receive communications. Guam is going to be more and more involved in ongoing satellite constellations in terms of monitoring and uploading and downloading data. Thank you, Vera. And I'll take that as advisement for more projects. If you have ideas for funders, let me know. Yes,
What
Dominic.
does the Marine activities research in the FSM or within the EZ or close by. I'm curious if our leaders are aware of those activities. Thank you.
I can't answer that question, Dominic, but let me just pull this out and let's look at all vessels that we're tracking over the last since last November. So again, a preponderance of these are going to be research vessels that are going on. There's a lot going on. Like look, most of the Japanese vessels you see here are going to be fisheries vessels, most of them. There are some other activities the Japanese have going on, but the Chinese research vessels are very, very active. Let me just looking down near you. This is an ongoing vessel. That's a Chinese tug is down near Palau. I'm not sure what that means. But yeah, there's just a lot of activity going on. And again, if your leaders are interested, this provides a platform for them to begin to look at it.
President Mori wants to know, why do they call them research vessels?
Well, because look, traditionally these vessels are for oceanographic research. The most classic has been fisheries. Japanese and Chinese vessels have fairly strong fisheries research base. The Koreans do as well. But increasingly, the vessels we're seeing, and if you drill down on a vessel, you'll tell the difference. I'm just going to click on a random Japanese one because, oops, no, that's not a fisheries vessel. Actually, this is an interesting one. This looks like research that's gone on around the island of Japan where they're looking at mining minerals. But most of the Japanese vessels you're going to see here are going to be, well, there's a South Korean ocean-going tug. I'll take that back. This is an undescribed research vessel. This is more likely to be oceanographic. Again, if we look at the activities that are going on around here, I'd have to spend more time on it. So this is an oceanographic research vessel. This could be, look, they could be doing a whole range of things, President Mori. They could be doing anything from examining the seafloor for minerals, critical minerals. As we know, throughout our region, given some of the structure of the seabeds and given the geological transformation of the Pacific region over the millennia, the area is rich in seabed minerals, critical minerals.
For information related to security.
So if you're looking for critical minerals, you're also mapping the seabed floor, which could be of assistance to your submarine operators, or it could be also of assistance to your vessels on the surface, which are looking for submarines. So yes, the research vessel is increasingly having many different meanings, and we think about the geopolitical competition.
Leland, my apologies.
Understand what's going on, especially. There you go. The Chinese, there is a Chinese embassy in Hong Kong. As you know, the service is the only country in the Micronesia region that has diplomatic relations with China. So while these vessels are out in the ocean, there is an embassy in Portland. I want to understand what kind of information that they're gathering on the ground and those that are gathering in the ocean, if you just mentioned seabed minerals. And we really don't know what kind of information being emitted from Portland that they get out from. How could we possibly understand so that we'll be prepared or maybe refrain from doing things that we should not be doing or doing things that we should be doing? The gathering of this kind of information, we really don't understand how they gather and how they analyze and how they can come to conclusion and what they're going to use this information. But we do need that kind of understanding of this information. Why are they gathering? For what purpose? Are they good for us or are they bad for us? What do we do? Do we just keep quiet? Or we just speak in our language so they can understand? If we speak English, they of course have to pick up what you talk about. But Davidson is in a very unique position because we have the diplomatic relations with Chinese. And we want to keep that relationship continue because we need their economic assistance and then also to balance out the situation in the Pacific. Anyway, I'm not really authorized to speak only in my language. I can talk, but in English, who knows? Maybe somebody is picking up somewhere in this room. But on the broader context, I want to thank Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And they talk about peace. Here we are talking about security, posturing about wars in the future. But thank you very much for reminding us that we need peace, not only for military security, but also for peace security. So I want to thank our sponsor.
Yes, and let me just also note, so the Carnegie Foundation provided the base for the development of this project, but Sasakawa Peace Foundation is supporting the regular updates. So they are helping us with the research associates that do the daily updates, the information feeds, and also provide us the support to do the maritime tracking. So this is really a critical point that they play. Let me just, in response to your question, Mr. President, I think if you have an embassy in Pohnpei, a Chinese embassy in Pohnpei, then the leadership in Pohnpei should ask the embassy about the information. If you're able to track the vessels, you have a point of information in which to raise and ask them what is the nature of the work and could they share the scientific information that's available. And I would say the same goes for the US. I would also say that in both cases, my gut tells me that there is a rush to identify critical minerals in our part of the world, and the objective is going to be extraction. And this is going to be the case for both the US and China. So again, my suggestion is whatever political processes you have should be directed at the embassies of those countries who have vessels that are doing this kind of research. And if they can't give you answers, then that raises an important question. What do they want? What are they not sharing?
We have a question from Larry.
I'll go back to Dr. Underwood's statement in his speech that we are all in someone else's plan.
Please correct me if I'm wrong to assume that the way that you're projecting or this research or this think tank is looking through the lens of perhaps the US seeing China as the enemy, the aggressor, defining those island chains. I wonder if there is how we're seeing from the other side, from the Chinese. Where are we in that equation? Are we still the second island chain? Are we the first? And so I'm just trying to, I don't know whether it makes any sense to assume that the project and this think tank is also very much looking at the other side of the equation and how the Chinese are also looking into this region, the Northwest Pacific, and maybe to a larger extent, the whole Pacific.
So,
You point out that they have a research vessel down out of Kiribati. What else is happening from that part of the rim? I'm talking about more specifically like the South Pacific area and maybe
so
South America.
Look, the first island chain, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, down through the Philippines, down to this part of Indonesia, was created during the Cold War by the United States for the intended purpose of containing China. So, look, this has been so long established that we don't really even think about that. The Chinese view, I think, is fairly clear. They're not going to be contained. So, as their prosperity has increased, they are beginning to use the same language that the U.S. has always used with respect to, freedom of navigation, et cetera. So the Chinese are going to tell you their operations over here, oh, that's all allowed under international law. That's freedom of navigation. So, I think, we are at a very interesting point in where the geopolitical competition is beginning to mirror each other in terms of the base language that they're using for their activity. So obviously, we need to evaluate all of that very carefully. I think the objective, though, with doing this is to talk about ultimately the higher the level of competition that approaches conflict, the more we are in danger. And again, we're on the edge over here, right? We're in a place that barely registers on anyone's radar when it comes to security, unless it's projection of force. But people don't think about the security of the islands. What is island security? So, while the United States and China have their engagements, the part of this focus is for us to think about what does security mean for us. That's what we hope people will take away from this particular project. Yes, Chris.
Yes. Thank you, Leland, for the well-informed presentation. Also, greetings to everyone. Yahweh from the Marshall Islands. Send greetings from President Hilda Heine, a former member of the team here. And just to thank Dr. Underwood and the rest of the tankers for us, the scholarship recipients of this important dialogue. My focus is more recently, the RMI has been a recipient of, for the last 2 years, of trucks washing ashore. And we are trying to track down, working with our limited capabilities, capacity to deal with tracking these vessels, or how are these drugs washing, along with some boats coming all the way from South Central America. If there is a way we can try to see track these vessels coming from that side of the world, all the way, and probably there's a drop-off point somewhere. Unfortunately, just last week we had the first ever truck summit involving a lot of it, which is more of a security issue in the communities now. So it's quite alarming to see this kind of activities and not knowing where they're actually originating from, or being brought down there. Thanks.
So there's really the narco trade presents really difficult challenges for vessel tracking. First of all, I think if it's a vessel that wants to stay dark, which many narco vessels will, they're not going to have their automated information system turned on, so you're not going to be able to track them. There are also complexities in satellite tracking. And these are technical issues with respect to how many passes a satellite has to have over a certain area. It must have to know someone is in the area. And even then, identifying a particular vessel can even be difficult with a lot of the satellite tracking. But having said that, in fact, just yesterday, our research associate that does the maritime activities maritime activities piece sent a information request to one of the people we work with in Washington about some very strange anomalous activity that they've seen over the last 6 months, which actually runs from the Marshalls, like the Line Islands group, up and down in a very strange way that appears to be what we call spoofing of the automated information system data. So I'll be interested to see what response we get back from our contacts in Washington at the Center for Strategic and International Studies who do this vessel tracking, but what they think might be going on. But it's interesting you raise that because it's sort of almost a direct north-south route that goes down from the Marshalls toward the Line Islands and Nauru. I don't know if it's related or not, but if we get more information, I'll let you know. I also, I would really encourage, if you have a drug task force there, to work with the DEA, work with INDOPACOM and those folks to see if they can help you on vessel identification. But, even they're going to have a hard time because, the narco trade is becoming increasingly sophisticated. They've got these low profile narco subs that are now appearing all over the South Pacific that are coming from far away as Peru and Chile.
Our example, our mission measure
Right.
the last 2 years.
So tracking these is really difficult, really difficult. But the best hope for the Marshalls is to leverage all the resources that you possibly can through DEA and through INDOPACOM and others. And if there's anything that we come up with, Mr. DeBroom, we'll certainly let you know. But it's interesting you raised that because that's actually an active question that we have about some very strange data along that route. Thank you.
Leland, while others gather their questions, we do have one online question. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, Governor, please. Governor, please.
When you were talking about research vessels, other than fishing vessels within the FSM, how far out are those research vehicles? Because I'm saying this because we have a denial right at rest with the US side to allow these vessels to sail within certain distance from the land. So how far out were those research vessels? Is it within 200 EEZ or outside the EEZ?
So, if we're looking over the last 6 months, this is obviously your vessel doing research down there.
That's one of our.
That's one of your vessels. This particular vessel, this research vessel that manages some submersibles, appears pretty close to Micronesia's the FSM's EEZ, but not quite in it. There is this was an interesting one. This is I'm guessing this actually is the one that was supporting the work at Wooley. I'm guessing this particular vessel was probably the vessel that was supporting the runway development at Wooley. Other than that, we're not really seeing over the last 6 months vessels in your EEZ. Again, this U.S. vessel, so the Sail Drone 3002, was probably right up against your FSM's EEZ. I don't think it's any secret that the U.S. government is very interested in working deals with the FSM on seabed mining. So I'm sure it's a hot topic right now. Yes. So, but that vessel looks probably not in the EEZ. It did cross. Again, it crossed the EEZ of the FSM when it was avoiding Senlaku.
Thank you, Leland, for sharing this information. Right off the top of, just thinking out loud, the most uh, needed audience for this kind of presentation should be our respective governments and our leaders, because you really, to be honest, we lack this kind of knowledge and information amongst all of us. Having said that, we would try to find a way in Palau if PCIS could come there and really not just inform our leaders, but the people, because we need to be educated and really updated of what's actually going on. And then PCIS is really fulfilling a void or an absence of this kind of communication between our respective islands. We always say we have common challenges, but we lack the sharing of common solutions and common answers. And just to immediately share our situation in Palau, I think we're also making many information that lacks solid data and solid facts behind those things. We have mentioned the security issue, but really, Palau doesn't have any enemies, and defense security is not really a priority, although we will be involved with it whether we like it or not. So security is also really has to do with ocean extractions, seabed mining and all that. But we do lack this kind of information. Security has a lot to do with climate change and global warming. What's being done, and these are the kinds of things we certainly have to acknowledge that as a sub-region, there is a definite need for us to share this information. Military installations is now happening all around our region, but we don't even know what the purpose of those installations will be. There's impacts on environmental damages that we need to share, impacts on water, electricity, you name it, solid waste. What is Guam doing with the things that we can also share with Palau and those of us that are, we're going to have radar stations in Palau. We're going to have bigger docks and ships coming in. What's the economic benefits to our local people? What did Guam do? What did Hawaii do? What did are we just giving up our land and then the economic benefits is going to go to companies outside of Palau? What is the opportunity for those of us to really benefit our people? So I do really appreciate what PCIS is starting, and I hope we have more partners like Sasakawa and Carnegie to give us the resources to collect and share this data. Because otherwise we're going to be in a situation where divide and conquer is going to be the mission of the day for us. They go to YAP and come and negotiate a situation that is perhaps a lot more lucrative in the same kind of land we're going to put up for in Palau. I mean, and even know what's happening to our neighbors. Going to be on whether we have the right information, the necessary information to share strategies, what works and what will not work, what's the good things to do, what to avoid. But definitely on a sub-regional basis, we can be heard a lot more effective than trying to do it on our own. Thank you.
Dominic.
Mike was out in Florida, was happening in May, and there's a need to do a term of reference for the Regional Security Committee, and this would include this kind of information so that it is being shared annually, twice a year with our leaders, the information that you're sharing so that they understand where we are in that area. So this is good information. I think our DR, one of them is here also, Secretariat based in Palau. We'll work with them to finalize that regional committee, the security committee, to be part of the MIF so that this information are shared. And so I just want to comment on something like the presence of military, US military in our region elevates the risk for us to be first attacked when there's conflict between US and China. The problem is we do not have the means to shield incoming missiles. Right there, but when there's a conflict, like I think Guam, they can shoot down missiles when it's coming, right? And so about the app, I mean, they don't have the means to defend missiles that are running our way. Thank you.
So the missile defense issue is a whole separate topic, which we could probably spend a morning and an afternoon on. But I think that the recent activities in the Middle East demonstrate both the capabilities and the shortcomings of missile defense systems. We saw some of the most vaunted missile defense systems, air missile defense systems that the United States has, become targets successfully of the projectiles of a second-rate military. What China has just completely obliterates anything Iran might even dream of in terms of capabilities. So there were successes in the air missile defense in the Middle East, but there's some massive vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities are magnified in multitudes when we start talking about anything in the Pacific. Specifically for what's happening in Micronesia. Internally at PCAS, and Dr. Cooper will talk about this later on today, the U.S. operating strategy, operating concept is called distributed and disperse. So we used to have at Anderson Air Force Base B-52s. They're no longer based there because the U.S. did not want 10% of their bomber fleet being exposed at Anderson. So they moved them out because if you put your eggs in one basket, then you could lose all your eggs in an early strike. So part of distributed and dispersed is not just to take away your assets. It's also when you return to have alternate fields and airfields. That's why there's Tinian and Yap and increasingly, austere runways in Palau. So we call that distributed and dispersed. We call that D2. But in fact, I think what's probably coming next in terms of the military strategy is D3, which is distribute, disperse, and defend. So if you have an airfield in Yap, or you have an airfield in Tinian, I would expect that you're going to see over the next 5 years, the U.S. having portable air defense systems in containers, et cetera, where they bring in radars and they bring in missile systems which are containerized, and they'll call that an air defense system for that area. Is it going to be significant? Probably not, but I think you're going to see more and more of it.
All right. Any final questions? This was a very exciting discussion, and we're definitely going to continue it. But for now, we're going to take a 15-minute break for some refreshments. If you need the restroom, again, it's right outside and to the left. And then we have coffee, water right out here. So let's stretch a little bit, stretch our legs out, stretch our arms, and we'll come back in 15 minutes for a presentation by Dr. Underwood. Let's give a round of applause for Leland. Jesus Mosley. academics and practitioners in the community here at Micronesia called the Micronesia Security Outlook, which is you have a printed copy right in front of you. That's a printed copy of our annual report for 2025. Let's give it up for Dr. Underwood, who will come and talk to us all about it.
Thank you very much, Ken. And I was telling Leland that was the sexiest presentation we're going to get out of the PCIS conference because it had so much information that people really want to know. And so that's going to be a terrific source of data. So, you know, as I was looking at how big that map was, of all the maritime activities, I was thinking the only map that I see like that on TV is about the Strait of Hormuz. When I see all those ships kind of all coalescing around the Strait of Hormuz so I think we're kind of having our own Strait of Hormuz here. I don't know what we're going to call it, the straight jacket of Micronesia, or exactly how we're going to refer to it, but it is very interesting. And the commentary on by President Mori about the research vessels. Why do they keep calling them research vessels? Well, they are research, but the research carries many things. But of course, for those of us who are a little bit older, it sort of reminds us of the Russian trawlers, the Russian fishing vessels that were right outside Apra Harbor. It seemed like all the good fish was always there for many, many years. So there's all of these things that are happening and going around. And that's there's two MDAs that really have a kind of an effect on the region. And many nations play a role in that. But the one that is for the Missile Defense Agency, that's the defense agency inside the Department of Defense or Department of War, that's responsible for thinking about missile defense. And of course, for Guam, this is a multi-billion-dollar project. And so there's questions about the efficacy or the ability of that MDA to really work it out well, given the kind of experiences that are ongoing in the war right now in near the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. Hey, we're gonna. I guess that mic got tired. So now we have a replacement mic. All right? We're good? Okay. So that MDA is about the Missile Defense Agency and the Missile Defense Architecture that is being proposed for the area. And of course, it is all based on the premise that it is defense of the U.S. homeland. And then Dominic asked the question about, well, what about the other bases? And I told him privately that, well, unfortunately, you're not part of the U.S. homeland. But then there might be some temporary fixtures or different kinds of shields. The other MDA is maritime domain awareness. And so that maritime domain awareness has many participants in it. And it has, you know, not just Japanese and Coast Guard, you know, just fishing vessels. So, and then brought up by the issue by Mr. DeBrew, by Chris, about, you know, the onslaught of and I was reminded, as someone had told me just, must have been about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and it didn't occur to me that this was a possibility. Someone told me that they're looking for an unmanned vessel that's in the Marshall, and they were trying to find it. And I just thought, well, it's just a research vessel. Now I have to go back through my email stream and pass that information along. In the way that PCIS works, just so that we kind of understand it, there are 3 individuals that are working it. The hardest working guy, and I'll have to say, is even though I'm the chair, the hardest working guy is Leland. because he's the guy who's constantly tracking all this stuff. And then every day you can go to Pacific Wind and see all the articles and all the public media that has been written about the region, about China, about competition. You can see all of that every day. Just go to Pacific Wind, and it has it kind of laid out for you every day. So that means that he probably gets up at 4 a.m. because that Pacific Wind is usually available by about 6 or 7 every morning. So that's the, and then of course the tracking of the Micronesia security model. The other major project is this, the Micronesia security model. Now, we don't have enough copies for every single person here because it costs a lot. Forgot how. Overflowing with resources, but we did give one to each head of the delegation. So this document is slightly different. It's more in the line of what we normally think a think tank does. It has thought pieces in it, and so our basis for presenting this is to figure out on how do we get attention to the region. So we'll get like international experts to talk about the region. And how about if we're developing regional expertise, local regional people, people in the region. And so this is kind of a combination. So the group of kind of researchers that we're generating from within the region, we call the Security of Micronesia Group. And the main person involved with this project is Dr. Ken Cooper. So all the projects that PCIS are involved with have somebody who's highly capable and highly responsible. My job is just to say hello, everybody, and welcome them, and be a glad hander and try to provide a little bit of theoretical underpinning of it. So the first quote here, this is from Echele Opa, and he's originally from Tonga and Fiji, and he provided the basis for a lot of our thinking today, which we think of as kind of common and ordinary. Oceania is us. We are the sea. We are the ocean. We must wake up to this ancient truth and together use it to overturn all hegemonic views that aim ultimately to confine us, again, physically and psychologically, in tiny spaces which we have resisted accepting as our sole appointed place and from which we have recently liberated ourselves. We must not allow anyone to belittle us again and take away our freedom. Amen. That's a powerful statement. Of course, that applies to that part of the Pacific that became independent. While people from Guam can look at it and go, yeah, that's us. Well, no, that's not really us. We're not really independent. We're not sovereign in that sense. But we do share in the emotional lift that's provided. And from that kind of intellectual leadership, we get the next one. Next slide. My trusty assistant from Teresita, which all of you, many of you are familiar with. Yes, this is the more practical voice. So the first one is highly theoretical. Now the next one is devoted to action. Yes, there is a sea of islands, and sea can be a verb. Yes, this ocean becomes a verb of awesome possibility. But let us also make island a verb. It is a way of living that could save our lives. Underlying that again, and this has been manifested by many students, many of whom work with you in various agencies, and they've read all these things, And we get other thinkers like Vince Diaz, who wrote an essay called "No Island is an Island." Again, reminding us that the connections and possibilities are strong. Next slide. So in the 2050 strategy for the blue Pacific continent, this is the kind of broad vision adopted by the Pacific Islands Forum as kind of the objective of all the Pacific Islands together. And of course, in that, actually includes territories too. So it doesn't, so now we feel a little bit included, American Samoa and Guam and the Northern Marianas. But we place great spiritual and cultural value on our oceans. We occupy a vitally significant place in global strategic terms. As a consequence, heightened geopolitical competition impacts our member countries. Further, there is increasing commercial and state-sponsored interest in our region's ecological and natural resources. And you can see that in the map on deep seabed mining. And you can see that in the experience of Guam and the CNMI. When the federal government first put out that they're going to occupy this much space for deep seabed mining, Guam and the Northern Marianas and even American Samoa unanimously opposed it. They don't. And the response was to double the size. So now we're left trying to figure out what is really important for external sources. This is reflected in the community's present interest in the blue economy and growing demand for our resources over years to come. So that enhances the understanding. So these are all steps along the way that kind of helps document the need for in-depth thinking about these issues and trying to find ways where island communities can work together to the extent possible. Maybe it isn't possible. Maybe it's, maybe it's just a kind of a vision that's tempered by practicality. Next slide. So this is a joint statement of U.S. Pacific Forum leaders. We acknowledge the unique political relationship between the United States, Republic of the Marshalls, FSM, Republic of Palau as a cornerstone of U.S. Pacific cooperation. Pretty clear statement. Next slide. And then, of course, we have the United States affiliated Pacific Islands, which has become a term of art. Used to be like, there's Micronesia, well, there's Guam and Micronesia. Sometimes you hear there's Guam and Micronesia, and sometimes, trying to think. But the federal government has come up with a perfect term, the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. So now that's a term that's used in federal agencies. It's used by regional agencies looking for money from the federal government. Because if they want to call us the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands and they got money, we want to call ourselves the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. And so that and other impact on the way that we think about the regions. So what we've done in this is we have a couple of well, not a couple, we have several people from the region who have written extensive articles that are in here. And then we also have some external, experts on foreign policy, international relations, nuclear weapons, nuclear conflict. So in this instance, the first one was just, and you can read, I know you're all dying to get to this document now, to read it. Now that I previewed it so well. Now you're all dying to read it. So the first one is from Dr. Isa Areola, CNMI. It's just, these are quotes that right out of their article. I resisted quoting myself because I thought, wow, that's too much. I'm already talking. Why would I put up a quote by me? So I'll put up one from Isa Areola. His perspective that militarization is a viable solution to solving long-term economic problems overlooks the critical issue of economic leakage. In a local and regional context, economic leakage is an economic term that refers to the process by which money generated in an economy leaves rather than circulating locally. It's an important reminder. For years, every time I get interviewed about the Guam economy, they ask me, what is the biggest export of Guam? I said, that's easy. Money. As soon as we get it, we send it out. As soon as we get it, we send it out. We don't let it circulate, permeate. And of course, she's writing in reference to the construction of facilities in Tinian and in Rhoda. Next slide. We'll go to our next SMG member here, James Mulvick, who many of you know, of course, longtime worker inside regional fisheries and is currently seen as a regional authority. In this competitive and asymmetric milieu, the extent to which Micronesians can avoid or mitigate the pacing threat of militant geopolitical competition will require a hard-nosed national security policy based on FSM's own national interests, which means, of course, that FSM must decide what those national interests are. It must seriously consider it. Can't just be waiting for people to kind of compete and then figure, oh, on the side, I can figure out how I can take advantage of this and how I can take advantage of that. James is articulating that you need to identify your national interests. What are your values? What is it that you stand for? What is it that you know? Because the old saying is if you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything. And so this is an important statement as well. Next slide. After Mr. Mulvick, it's loading. Coming soon. Yeah, Jordine Remegasov, and she wrote an extensive article on the construction of the military facilities in Palau ongoing now. Throughout all this unprecedented activity, the U.S. military has missed and fell short of fulfilling its duties and responsibilities under U.S. Public Law 99658, the Compact of U.S. with Palau. Although Title III of the Compact affirms inclusive U.S. military use of Palau, Title VII, Section 162 stipulates that environmental standards must be met. And so the question that she raises is the Palau government requiring that, or is it easing those environmental concerns, which are part of the compact? So that's another issue. Again, these are individuals who came up with these on their own, under the guidance of expert guidance of Dr. Cooper, who edited them for writing and veracity, but certainly not for opinion or point of view. Next slide. Kathy Jetnall Kitchener from the Marshall Islands, she once did a YouTube, and that YouTube was so fantastic. I think it has like, by now, 300,000 views. And I invited her to speak at the University of Guam as a presidential lecturer. And I said, I felt so jealous because all the YouTubes I've done, the most I've ever gotten is like 500. And she had over 200,000 views of her YouTube. So, but amazing spokesperson for climate change. Right in your face and directly. But in here, while national security is almost always seen as preparation for attack and geopolitical maneuvering in its various forms, the metaphor on junta, which is like taking lunch or preparing for a long journey, reminds us that security for communities and islander states is also first and foremost about feeding our citizens and sustaining us as a community for the journey ahead. So again, here is a slightly different point of view. Again, drawing back a national security issue to sustainability. And of course, she's a great for climate change, reminding us of our responsibility. And I think that's what PCAIS is trying to do, to give rise to those voices. Next slide. Now, This one is from Ankit Panda, who's works for the Carnegie International Endowment for Peace. And he's kind of a world on nuclear, examining nuclear conflict. It will be incumbent on interested parties within Micronesia to include governments and civil society groups like ours and other groups that are out there to raise awareness of the increasingly challenging nuclear environment in the Pacific. So, what he, again, read that part, because the idea of nuclear conflict has shifted. So now they're talking about the possibility of so-called limited nuclear war or tactical nuclear weapons, where you use a smaller device in the context of conflict. And the place that is can be attempted is a place like Guam, because or any of the islands in Micronesia, because it will not create widespread damage, but it would have a limited impact on that island in which it is used. So it's a complicated argument that he's making. So I urge you to kind of embrace it and look at it. But basically, because there is no replacement of the START process, where the limiting of nuclear weapons means that people are now free to advance the missile defense system, which in turn will generate more nuclear weapons. And there's no limit on that. And so what happens is the possibility of nuclear war enters the picture. I will say that PCIS has relationships with other think tanks, and including the CSIS. I think Ken mentioned that earlier. So CIS, Center for Strategic International Studies, is kind of like one of the really huge think tanks, sort of seen as politically neutral. And they do war games. So they've done war games on what conflict looks like in Guam. And what about the use of nuclear weapons? And in that, so once people are wargaming that, then it's sort of like in the back of their minds that this is a possibility. I was reassured by the person who was running the war games. I said, well, what advice do you have for someone who lives on Guam? He goes, don't live near a military base. Well, that's pretty hard. All right, so that's good advice for all of you that are in Guam. Don't live near a nuclear military base. But he said the good news is that they did 25 scenarios, and most of Guam survived the scenario. But again, it's making the unthinkable thinkable. Now I know that people in uniform are supposed to imagine the worst case scenario and plan for that. But this looks like it's going in a slightly more advanced direction. Okay, next slide. Zach Cooper, we work for American Enterprise Institute, very level-headed. This is a politically conservative think tank. The United States will focus most of its resources on the Marianas Islands while trying to execute its compacts. U.S. military investments in Guam, Tinian, and Saipan will likely continue or even accelerate, given the reliance on second island chain operating locations. But the economic elements of American engagement may suffer. In other words, there's going to be a lot of American investment, not in the economy, but in the military. So you have to kind of figure that out. How do you balance that as a policymaker, as someone advising a policymaker? How do you make that more balanced? Okay. So, that's a kind of an interesting contradistinction to what China normally does, which is China, of course, increasing their military activity, but at the same time increasing their business experience. And the typical response by the U.S. government to that is, don't do business with the Chinese because they're, you know, corrupt, they're deceptive. It's, and it's going to affect your economy. So it's the response by island governments. Okay, they're not going to invest in our economy. Are you going to invest in our economy? Who's going to invest in our economy? Zach Cooper thinks, well, the US is not going to invest in these economies. They're just going to continue to look at it as basically a security issue as primarily military. And next slide, I think that it. All right. Oh, well, here, many of you know Gonzaga Puas. He has his own sort of think tank. As I said, Micronesia Institute for Research and Development, Dr. Puas. Micronesians need a pool of friends who respect their sovereignties and are prepared to lend a hand without tying its political hands together. So trying again to give voice to that through this document to get a different perspective, to provide that for people to take a look at. And I think we have one more. Oh, we have two more. Ben Wanzan, who's at the Australian National University, he's writing in here about all of the Chinese initiatives. So if you want to know what the Chinese initiatives are, at the time he wrote about them. As the Pacific region, including Micronesia, is increasingly caught in the great power competition, more intellectual support from universities, research institutes, and think tanks. Hey, I deliberately found that quote. Said we need more think tanks and think tanks in the region to inform Micronesia's policy making will be much needed. So again, that's but if you read it, you can see what he thinks China is up to, and certainly. I don't want to put the representative of our funder for this activity out. I put him up last because he's the most important one. And this is from given these possibilities, the FAS are as important to Japan's security as the Japan-US alliance. Hideyoki Shirozawa. So it is important. It's like trying to understand that Japan is also a player. Of course, not to the extent that China or the US is, but Japan has a wide level of experience in the region that goes back many decades. And so there may be opportunities for that relationship to mature in unique ways and in very helpful ways. So all of that is outlined here. And I just wanted to make a couple of additional comments. The whole point of a think tank is to try to encourage people to analyze and examine things from a slightly different point of view. I'm not saying that it's overly difficult or it's overly easy. But I wanted to stress that in order for it to occur, you need something that is non-governmental. And you need something that comes from what they call civil society. And you need someone an organization that is not responsible for advancing an initiative or frustrating an initiative. And so we think that we're performing that role. And as you look at the way that we are configured, the way the region is configured between territories and the compact states, and even if we wanted to include in there Nauru and Kiribati, which of course are also part of Micronesia, part of a larger, the president's group of Micronesia, that also is an important element to consider. So I just wanted to kind of preview that and now open the floor for questions. Open it for dialogue. Please let me know if there's something that we need to do or something that is kind of a question in your mind about what we should be doing, or maybe something we know about. So the floor is open.
John, somehow, I don't like guys. Question, constructive answers on that. Please let us know and direct them towards Dr. Underwood.
Should have told you at the beginning that I expected a question from each delegation. But, this is a kind of a complicated matter, because, and to show you how serious this issue is, of course, there's the Indo-Pacific has a couple of offices that are devoted especially for dealing with the security issues in the region, and Joint Task Force Micronesia and Joint Regional Awareness. And the level of the attention is demonstrated by the fact that you have, two admirals. Flag Circle up there in Nimitz getting bigger. I think, Flag Circle is traditionally where all the admirals live. So that area has more admirals than usual. So they're engaged in explaining what not from they're not planning what to happen out here. They're more or less implementing what is happening. But their implications are.
Thank you. So just wondering how much information or to what extent of this kind of information
We get from the US military or say from the federal government that we, and do we run a risk of any conflicts with the kind of information that we're allowed to say or not say?
Into that issue at all. People are so people. As Leland has pointed out, all of the information we get is open source. It's not like we have a network. Our network, most of it is on Google. So, it's almost available to anybody who wants to expend the effort. So that, all the materials we get are open source. Now, of course, when you do criticisms or you raise questions, people always want to check out your motivation. And so it's not so we've said some pretty critical things that some people might say volatile things about the nature of some of the military planning that's going on in Guam in particular and in the region. But the relationship is friendly. The relationship is non-hostile. I personally am not worried about anything. Some people say, well, are you engaging in for some people, any criticism is disloyalty. That's a personality thing. Any criticism is seen as disloyalty. For some people, any criticism is welcome and helps refine their position. So, I think that's a kind of a personality question. There have been, over the years, I've gotten almost regular briefings from every admiral that has come to Guam. I think I've gotten a briefing from every admiral that's come to Guam since 1993, since before some of you were born. Some of them were very engaging and open and grateful. Some of them were very rough and tumble and kind of demanding. In this particular time, the Trump administration and Secretary Hegseth has put out the order that they're not supposed to work with think tanks. So that means that the normal kind of relationships people used to have are no longer there. But We still we talk to people who are retired, but there's lots of people out there, and we do have direct conversation. So it's not a totally closed environment. But some people think of it as some people interpret almost any criticism as disloyal, and there's nothing at all in what we're saying. We're not advancing anyone's cause. It's just that no nation, no matter how strong it is, that cannot benefit from being questioned.
I wanted to point out that it is the security environment or this political environment is very erratic right now. We have Trump administration, the president got elected for being a disruptor, right? He has done that across the United States. And when we look at the defense strategy and its pivot to the Western Hemisphere, in addition to keeping some balls here in the Pacific, right? That also has implications for the allies of the U.S. So my question was, or maybe the point is that, I think the resources are very timely with the geopolitical competition between the two great powers. But there's other implications with the rest of the alliance. So, we have the security situation in Japan is rapidly evolving, where their government now is moving out of a defense mode and are going to actively be spending and expanding their military arsenal. Same thing with the Koreans, right? The President Trump is projecting that the South Koreans need to take the peninsula, and then we have these two other areas. In the Philippines, there's a large number of military, have a large number of guardsmen that are there continuously to support that. But the Australians also have something going on with this deal to purchase the Virginia class nuclear submarine. So what the point I wanted to make is that even how we're projecting into the future, there's so many things happening that we really have to put our seatbelt on to keep track. I've talked to Australian government officials, and they're thinking about in the future training and operations on Guam between the U.S. and Australia. When we're talking about the Philippines, we have a very strong, long-standing partnership agreement with our National Guard and Philippine military, and it seems that there's a growing amount of activities, and now there's going to be a third. There's a state partnership agreement with Palau. There's a state partnership looming with Nebraska, Guam, and the Marshall Islands. But then with the Japanese, trying to understand what that means for their decisions on the utilization of Camp Blas and the amount of money that the Japanese government has invested in that infrastructure. And now, the Department of the Army is going to be using a lot of that to support the missile defense, not having a base. So I think my point is that there's just so many developments occurring in a very rapid way. It's very important for civil society to help governments and people kind of keep track of about what exactly is happening, because a lot of things that we were looking at last year might be modified the next time that, by the way, the president is going to China in a few days. We're going to have to see what is the posture going to be after that meeting.
Go one way for a couple of days and maybe go another way for the next couple of days. So it's the erratic nature of that, which is in a way, forcing the hand of, regional powers like Japan and Korea and the Philippines, if they're expected to take on more of their own burden for their defense, well, they're going to act more independently, and that's a consequence of that security insecurity kind of road that we're traveling down. So when your security is like you're driving down the road and you're watching for incoming traffic, but then all of a sudden something comes out from your side, then that's the environment that we find ourselves in. So the nature of that and the nature of the explanations that are given to that force in a way force the intermediaries, the people in uniform, the flag officers, to constantly explain and re-explain what they're doing. And so, in a way, I sort of feel badly for them because they themselves are really just bearer of news and erratic changes that are moving on. That's why it's so critical, like these people, the Security of Micronesia group is so critical to identify what is really critical for you. What is critical for you? What are like non-negotiables? What are things that are like you're not going to get into? And in the beginning, people think of everything as a transaction. You know, I give you this, you give me that. And so certainly that's the characteristic of President Trump's whole approach to everything. Everything is a kind of a transaction, you know. A threat followed up with a handshake, then followed up with another threat, followed up with a handshake. And then somewhere along the line, you're thinking, if I get to the handshake phase, I might get something out of this. But the permanence of that relationship is not is not made possible by not identifying yourself what is critical for you. And so, you know, it's important. And of course, we have no real in-depth understanding of what's going to go on with in Beijing as a result of this meeting. But something will happen, and I'm sure everyone is paying close attention. So there's an arc around that, which of course will be discussed in the session on the first island chain, which is kind of rearranging now the geostrategic thinking about this area and the nature of that competition. And you know, in that process, what's going on in the Philippine Sea and who's involved in the Philippine Sea is going to really, and I have to say, it's not just military. As pointed out by Leland, it's the deep seabed mining, it's the search for materials. And so what in that process happens is that the whole economic development and potential, as well as downside, is going to be huge. So deep seabed mining may rearrange the economies of the area we live in a way that even the military could do. We just don't know that because that's going to heighten that. So it behooves us to not form our own research vessel, but certainly it's like Vera's question about you know, space and cybersecurity and now deep seabed mining. This is a target-rich environment for analysis, and that's why we continue to plug away with it. And you know, in the formation, if you look at the report and you see the individuals who are writing these reports, and remember that they come mostly from the region. So if you know individuals who want to participate and who have the kind of capability to engage in a little bit of analysis and you know, refer them to us because you know we need all the help we can. This is meant as a kind of not to overly stress this, but it's a kind of a grassroots academic intellectual effort. It's not just something that a bunch of people up at the university sat around and thought up, and it's like trying to reach out to those people. And there's so much talent. All of you know people who are talented, who've gone to school in places other than the University of Guam, not to say. There's a lot of talent out there. And so refer them to us so we can utilize that talent on our regional path.
We do have a question from online. Is there an inventory of policies or laws that each island nation and territory has to protect its resources, such as the land, sea, communications, utilities, and food?
Well, if there isn't one, there should be one. That's the, yeah. So again, that goes back to the Micronesian Island Forum. What the point of is to be able to amass regional resources in order to solve those kinds of issues and concerns. So sure, you know, I know that one of the things that NIST did last year is that they identified that the Micronesian Area Research Center, really under Dr. Cooper's leadership, was going to start amassing all the diplomatic history, which has not been amassed, the diplomatic history that made the compacts possible. And what were they saying? And what were they thinking when that was ongoing? That's not Dr. Cooper trying to take over the compacts. That's Dr. Cooper trying to help bring together information that maybe many people have forgotten about what the origin was. What were the exchange of notes? What were different people saying? And what were different people thinking? So that diplomatic history, the compendium of laws relative to the environment, relative to resource protection, those are, and of course, relative to the economies, those are equally important because they are really critical elements of security.
And Dr. Underwood, if I may also be focusing on what should our sub-regional response be to the information that we raise and get a negative or a punitive. It's been out in the press that after Guam raised its concern about
And thank you for that, President Remengesau. That's a question about regional joint action, which should be addressed because everybody wants to say, well, that's not my business. That's your business. Is it your business? It's not my business. And then you're also riding on that kind of like, what is the difference between a territory of the United States saying something and an independent nation saying something? You know, so there are people out there, you know, sometimes I pay attention to what's going on in the internet and online and on various chats. And sometimes I try not to pay attention to it, you know. So one comment on this is that this event is being organized by the CCP. So the Chinese Communist Party. That was a comment online about this event is being organized by the CCP, which is really news to me. But again, another more serious comment is, you know, what can Guam and the Northern Marianas do working together with what are essentially sovereign states? It's not the same. The COFA states are sovereign. They have UN membership. They have that. So then the question might be thrown back at the sovereign states. Well, how are you going to use your sovereignty? When are you going to use your sovereignty? Are you going to use your sovereignty to help your neighbors? Or,
maybe you're just going to say, it's not my business. You expect your territorial neighbors to help you on other issues. So when are you going to help your territorial neighbors on these issues? That's a major kind of thought process and consideration of how we formulate regional policy, which has yet to be fully addressed, because we normally just want to say, kind of stay out of each other's way. You know, that's not my business.
Yeah. There are times when the let's say for Eversemen Palau and the Marshall Islands can speak on behalf of Guam and CNMI at the United Nations because they're not represented at the United Nations. So likewise, CNMI and Guam can speak directly with the U.S. On behalf of the Micronesian island countries. So we have these areas where we speak for each other, as I said, at the United Nations, or together we can speak with the U.S. As independent entities or affiliated states or incorporated territories. So we have two areas where we can help each other.
Well, that's going to take some leadership, and of course, it's going to take some kind of thinking about our assumptions about what constitutes regional collaboration. And I know that in the past, in the United Nations, that the compact states have, said things and voted in ways, not all the time, but voted in ways that were beneficial to the U.S. territories. And in ways that were not in line with the thinking of the United States government. So that's all of the kinds of possibilities that remain out there. So I'm hoping that this Micronesian security outlook, helps us kind of refine some of this thinking, helps us kind of guide our way to the next Micronesian Island Forum, where, kind of like thinking about how are we going to make this a little bit more real. And also just, again, just clarifying that, the way that we've worked this so far, and I'm grateful to the Advisory Council, especially also great, and, President Hilda Heine was an original member of the Advisory Council, and of course, she's gone on to bigger and better things again. So we're happy with that. But just to, kind of like between Leland and who's like our, military kind of expert, and Ken, who's the kind of international relations expert, and me, I'm just the oldest guy in the room. So that's who we are. One more question. One more. Go ahead, Loli.
Well, there's several things I'm curious about. One of the things that I am curious about is what are Micronesian leaders? How are they brokering the tension between Taiwan and China? Because I know that Taiwan has a presence in some of the Micronesian islands as well as China. So I'm curious to find out how do you broker that tension or the strife? And then the other question I had was, during the nuclear free and independent Pacific movement, we would often talk about the number of nuclear warheads in the islands, because, it's not only just somebody hitting us with a nuclear capability, but if there's nuclear presence on the islands, then, a drone can hit a warhead and implode, right? So Robert, is there any current sense of the actual nuclear environment that exists in our Micronesian Pacific?
Yeah, well, Leland knows all about that. But the question about relationships between Taiwan and the compact states is, of course, really complicated and very intense. And so, that's one of those kind of, unresolved issues. That's for me, I always think of it as, well, that's not my lane, But on the other hand, what happens in Taiwan is sort of in my lane because, squabbling over Taiwan is really providing the undergirding the competition. And the military preparation was originally based, the so-called Davidson window was originally based on the idea that China was going to attack Taiwan or take Taiwan forcibly by 2027. So Happy New Year, everyone. Go ahead, Dominic.
Yes, I just wondering, you mentioned that there's some study of war games, nuclear war games for drone that has been done, but I wonder if there's any that's been done for Micronesia. And the rest of money, like, especially for Yap and Palau. Now that we're at the level where the presence of the use of military is there. And if there is none, can there be a war game study on this?
So the question is mentioning war games on Guam. Has there been a war game on YAP, FSM, and Palau? To my knowledge, no, I've not heard. And of course, wargaming is kind of encouraged by Department of Defense folks. Leland?
Not wargaming per se, but the Stimson Center and the Hudson Institute have both done extensive studies on aircraft mobilization under the Agile Combat Employment Program of the U.S. Air Force, which is their distribute and disperse strategy. So they look at the lack of hardened shelters in some of these places like Tinian and Yap, and they look at the ability of the Air Force to generate force from those locations. And it's not particularly optimistic. I think in general, the assessment is the U.S. will be able to generate about 25% of the number of sorties that the Chinese would be able to generate using the Agile Combat Employment mechanism from, using Tinian, Guam, and Yap under the ACE program. But it's even using commercial satellite, the complication becomes that the ability for U.S. forces in the islands to be able to set themselves, to refuel, and to rearm is a very, very narrow window. And
take one more
question.
And fostering the relationship between the FSM and China. I remember that presence as small, but it's grown, and as alluded to by former President Mori, that relationship is probably very unique because we are the only one with diplomatic relations and presence of embassy. But I recall in those days, there was always a statement reflecting Confucius' thinking of, a friend in need is a friend indeed, that bode well with our people, and it has grown. We have citizens of our country who are now speaking Chinese, and they've gone and continues to grow. My question would be, have you, on a hypothetical thinking, looked at what if the Federated States of Micronesia, let's say Xi Jinping decide to triple the compact funding, if that's what it is, and FSM moves out of the equation and stops any military development in our country, would that change a lot of things for Uncle Sam and for Washington? I suppose it would, but how would that kind of thing? If, I go back again to your projection, that you put up Dr. Puas's statement of like, we need friends who don't tie up our hands politically.
Right.
But it seems that maybe a lot of the things happening is somebody tying someone's hands with money.
Well, that's a hypothetical that I would be hesitant to respond to because I don't know. But obviously, there are probably people who are gaming this scenario all the time, and that is to what extent. And so for the U.S. response to that is also, not really quite clear how that original compact really ties the FSM, or is the FSM really free to simply pursue something else in the future? If they say, "Well, you're not going to give me any funding, I can take a different road." Well, that certainly will change the dynamics a lot. Probably mean more money for Guam too. Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead.
So this is not question. Dr. Underwood, let me just share a story about what our response was when North Korea made that public statement that they have missiles now that they can hit Guam. They actually identified Guam. So in Palau, we were very, very sympathetic and very such, oh no, our brothers and sisters from Guam, they're in danger of being hit. Until the media kind of made it very clear that those missiles are actually not very accurate. So they may intend to hit Guam, but it hits Guam or Yap.
Okay, well, I think they're substantially more accurate now.
Those happy notes. For the online audience, this concludes day one of the Micronesian Security Dialogue. For those of you online, we will resume tomorrow at 1 p.m. tomorrow Standard Time with a presentation by Dr. Marco De Jong, followed by a presentation by James Crabtree. We'd like to extend Sijus Masi to the Richard F. Taitano Micronesian Area Research Center and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, as well as to everyone who joined us today. So thank you, our online audience. For those of us here in this room, we're about to get to probably the best part of today, which is lunch. But before we do that, if we can just rise and maybe say a quick prayer for those who would like to engage. And I'd like to ask Sinalo if she can lead us in prayer, and Fino Tomorrow, if she doesn't mind.
Jesus Masi. Ni Tatay, la Hina, and Espiritu Santo. Amen. Zeus tatan mami, hago gumigiha, itaw-tawta, gwinigi, sa Micronesia, mangaigi imangay hilo, imangay tiningo, iman menhalum, natawtagwi, para mailaw, i minaput tiempo bago, in gagagaw non giyaham mo na, unat metgudham, unat fitmiham, cosa ki sinya inset bi itaw-tawta gwini gi islata siha. Si Zeus maasi, bendisi loko nengkano ni parata no aprobet sa pago na haani, donklo loko na bendisyon mangge hilo okasyon pago na haani, dyan membron ginisalapin na banda, tanai no si Zeus maasi po todo ya zuduniha, cosa kisinya tana sigi mo na todo stitsetso para iminauli kitaw-tawta. Amen.
Si Zeus Masi,